welcome to Meta-Ethics. I'm joined again by Adrian. Today we are going to be talking about meditation. Is it bullshit or is it legit? So I'll start by saying I've been practicing meditation for almost daily for a couple months now. Using the Waking Up Sam Harris app recommended to me by Adrian. You've got a lot more experience than me. When did you start doing it?
So it's 2021, which is important for me because it had to do a lot to do with my, so for those who are not Australian listeners, the HSC, the exam to finish high school. So that was the time I started meditating. So that would be 2018. I found in terms of, I was kind of looking for something in terms of that would help with procrastination and stress and that kind of thing in that, kind of challenging time. And then subsequently, I mean, it's quite tied up, I would say, with psychedelic use. So I guess we have, it's kind of hard to separate those two topics. But and then shortly after that, maybe a year after that, I went on my first and sadly only meditation retreat, which is for the duration of a weekend, so 3 days. And that was pretty challenging, but pretty interesting. And so, and I've just been practicing daily since. There's a few, Ethan and I have started a university type group oriented around meditation, but there's some in the local community that I've also sort of dipped my toes in and out of. That's actually who the retreat that I went to, that's actually who it was organized by. So, I try to practice relatively regularly. It doesn't always work out, but honestly, of all the things that I do, it's probably the one thing I'm most consistent with, which isn't saying a whole lot, but it's so what I'm trying to say is it's kind of the pillar of everything else. And I think that's a good way of kind of thinking about it, because it's you're inherently thinking in terms of attention. One thing you learn is that any sort of object of your attention is not necessarily any more valid than anything else. One thing that's mentioned in the early Sam Harris sessions is if there's a noise from construction or something in the background, you needn't necessarily worry about that thing. Oh, this is ruining the meditation. I'm supposed to be focusing on the breath. Well, any sensation, including thoughts, entirely valid. So there's that.
Yeah. Funny thing to note is when I was doing that introductory course and Sam mentioned that there was actually a construction site outside my room, so it was very much appreciated to note. And in some of the sessions, he tells you to focus on specific senses, such as what you can see or what you can hear, and the construction sounds were definitely a big part of that. So I guess attention comes up as one of the immediate possible benefits of meditation, and in a sense I can see how that is the case, because it certainly requires practice and a sense of discipline. But then where I get a bit confused is you have this sensation of a conscious mind focusing on certain things, but that sensation of focus itself is also just an appearance in consciousness. So where I've got to from meditation is I feel as though I can go back to this sensation where it's like I'm sitting in front of a screen and everything, I'm simply watching it happen. All of these sights coming towards me, the very sense of vision, everything I hear. This includes thoughts, the awareness that this is basically just some sort of screen, physical sensations, and all I am is this point of awareness. So from that, it doesn't seem up to me whether I'm concentrating or something. I feel like this ties into free will, similar to how I don't choose to see X or Y. I don't choose to think a certain thought. It seems like almost contradictory in that sense.
Are you talking in terms of having a directed attention, in terms of, you know, there's a sense that the practice is something that's kind of active, but the teaching of the practice, what you actually learn through that process is that you don't have any sense of control. So there's kind of a sense of a contradiction, or at least a tension between the idea of, you know, there's an act of meditating, but the act of meditating is only kind of noticing what was already there all along.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose it's, you know, it's not impossible that like those two ideas can be together, but it's like what you observe while meditating, and I would say what you're observing is, or what I'm observing at least, is what I previously described, this sensation of being in front of a screen. It seems to be almost the opposite of like being able to focus really well. Like I think someone would portray like,
yes, yeah,
you should meditate because, you know, like you'll just be able to like focus and like, tune in super well. And like that just seems like a completely different realm to this, you know, screen sensation.
Great. So yeah, there's two sort of types. I mean, there's obviously many types of meditation, but you're pointing to a particularly important duality, which is kind of, I believe Vipassana is the one that's kind of referred to as like mindfulness, and is more about kind of open awareness and taking what kind of comes. And then I think, as I understand it, Zen, some schools of Zen tend to have more of an emphasis upon, you know, really focusing it on a single object, which is to say object of meditation. So anything you know, it could be a literal object, but it could be the breath or something. So these are kind of... That
includes things like sight and sound.
Yes,
does it?
Exactly. Yeah. So they're different practices, and it's not to say you can't switch, but I mean, there are practices which incorporate switching between those two, but yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. There's a difference between kind of being open and allowing whatever, you know what I mean? If you inherently, if you're just opening yourself to the next sensation that comes, well, it's just going to be a stream of different things. Oh, here's the wind. Oh, there's, you know, some noise outside. It is going to feel almost a little ADHD or something. It's like just jumping from one thing to the next. That feels a bit antithetical to what we're, you know, what we think is the product or the results of meditation. You know what I mean? But I would say I think both types of attention are important anyway. Hopefully this won't be too long of a segue, but it's interesting to me how, for example, with the, you know, advent and widespread usage of mobile phones, you know, it's important to note that we're already all the time practicing attention in some way, but we sort of practice it in different ways. So if you're looking at your phone and you're sort of, you know, listening to music and going through different notifications on different apps or something, that is training attention, but it's training a specific kind of attention, which is the ability to switch between things quite rapidly. That's not a useless skill, you know what I mean? What people lament when they're talking about, you know, iPhones being a, you know, distracting us and, you know, affecting our well-being, is that we lose that, you know, equally important other kind of attention, which is kind of that deep focus of being able to focus on one thing for a long period of time, you know, which is essential for what, you know, I think is important for certain types of creative and intellectual work. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I think we can make a distinction between those two types of practice.
So then the Zen meditation is the one that is kind of like a focus training, whereas the Vipassana is just recognizing appearances in consciousness and seeing yourself as a point of awareness.
I think roughly speaking, yes. And a brief point to add, there's many schools of Zen, there's many schools of, you know, there's all these different subtypes, but there is kind of a relationship between the two, in that often, I'm not quite sure how to link actually the open awareness to the idea of kind of observing the illusion of the self, which is another kind of topic to get into. But the way it's been explained to me is that kind of that, you know, really focused kind of pinpointing your awareness on a particular thing is kind of a tool you use to build up the attentional skill sufficient to recognize that illusion of the self. It's kind of like you need, I wish I had a sort of a good analogy prepared here, but it's kind of like you need to, I don't know, enhance your telescope or something in order to actually be able to see what it, you know, it's like the lack of self is always there, but you need the requisite tool to be able to see it. And that kind of is this pointed attentional kind of, you know, apparatus.
So then I guess if we've got to this point of talking about different types of meditation, there's certainly many doors open that we should return to. But another kind that I'm interested in your thoughts on is the Metta meditation, aptly named for the Mehta-Ethics channel. This is the one that I seem
skeptical.
The most skeptical of, because it's hard to determine the goal, right? So metta meditation, for the Meta-Ethics listeners, is, I'm probably not the best person to explain, but essentially one example might be that you could focus on a person and focus as much as you can on giving love to that person. Or would you like to expand on that at all?
Yeah, so the important component is that you're kind of doing it in a staged way. So you start with those who you feel most readily feel kind of affection and love for, not kind of a romantic or, love that's tinged with, I guess, romantic or sexual attraction, more sort of a familial kind of,
pure sexual meditation.
Yeah, exactly. You're trying to view, that's an interesting idea, viewing everyone as you channel your sexual attention onto everyone. But unfortunately, this is the opposite. Maybe you need to get into sort of the tantra practices, and that's the good stuff. But I realized I made a mistake there because I kind of said it as like familial love. I guess the point is to make it it's like you take the love that is associated with family context for some people. Obviously, some people, don't feel that for their family. That's fair enough. And, take that as something universal and try to apply it to everyone, which is, also an experience people describe, whether it's on psychedelics or MDMA, that kind of thing, or, even through kind of spiritual breakthroughs through, the meditation practice, is this kind of like universal sense of empathy or something, and even like, overwhelming horror and sadness at, the enormity of the human and non-human suffering. But so the practice, you might start with a close friend or family or whatever, kind of pinpoint and settle into that feeling of, most importantly, I guess, empathy, but love and affection. And then you kind of try to extend that feeling to people who you have, increasingly more distance or, even animosity towards. So be it, someone you don't know very well, an acquaintance, or down to, someone who's wronged you, and so on. Yeah.
So in terms of like the goal of metta meditation, I can definitely like see some aspects of it will have like pretty obvious benefits. Like I try my hardest to, recognize everybody as, being to a large part a product of their circumstances, and, not judge people off the bat. I feel like, this is something that could help with. And then I suppose you could picture, like, if you think of, loving your best friend, that, that's pretty easy, and I suppose could be imagined as pointless. But if you view it as a stepping stone towards getting to that, that person that you don't currently have love for, then I could see the benefit of that. It's just there seems to be a little bit of unclearness as to whether that's really the intention. Like, it seems as though I get the sense that the idea is while you're meditating, you're sending out some kind of like positive energy beam.
Yeah, don't think about it too literally. You don't have to subscribe to any. Yeah.
So that seems to be what a lot of people believe. I don't know if that's just a metaphor or if that's genuinely seems to be the belief of some practitioners.
No doubt it is. No doubt this is something that, as it's been brought into the West and to a secular context, it's kind of been stripped of that component. But no doubt there were, plenty of people today who choose to kind of approach their practice in that way, or, there's some kind of traditional lineage in which that's, the way it was practiced. But that's certainly not the way I think about it. I would say sometimes, like, honestly, if you can get over that initial discomfort, sometimes, you'll be provided with sort of metaphors of that kind, which are kind of have some use. So, for example, one exercise that Sam has on the Waking Up app is he kind of talks about like, breathing in the world and then breathing out yourself as kind of this, you build up the two separately and you kind of put them together, and it's sort of meant to be some kind of broadly speaking, metaphor to kind of get you to see through this. Obviously you're not literally breathing out yourself, right? So it's like, and people are happy to take that however they want. But I think that, it is a complicated question as to the extent to which these techniques can be separated from the cultural context in which, they kind of arose, where sometimes there's often a more, kind of esoteric bent to their origins. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. So then, in that sense, because personally I would have a lot of trouble subscribing to any sort of supernatural belief. Although I did hear that apparently the David Lynch Foundation proved that by meditating they could reduce the crime rate in a certain city. Which it sounds very, very sketchy, and it's not something I've looked into. So I'm not just gonna believe or disbelieve it right off the bat.
Yeah, and that's transcendental meditation, which I don't know heaps about, but you use a mantra, and it has different sort of it has its own set of origins. I think it was one of the first sort of schools that was kind of popularized meditation in the West. Yeah.
So then we can think of the goal of metta meditation to essentially be like the benefit is only really for the practitioner, and perhaps if the practitioner becomes really ascended, then whoever the practitioner engages with in life.
Right. I think that's really important. Sorry, before I go into that point, I just want to briefly state, apparently it can also help. I read somewhere that it could help with social anxiety. I wonder if it's a similar mechanism to, I know MDMA has a similar effect in people with autism. But more broadly, I think it's funny. I certainly do spend a lot more time on mindfulness and kind of have marginalized metta to a large extent, but it may actually be the more important practice in the sense that, I don't know, it's especially culturally speaking, it's less intensely kind of individualist. Like, we need to really ascertain what is the purpose of our meditation practice. And I think ultimately it should be to provide benefit to, whether you view it as the goal, which I think is valid, or the side product, in terms of how does that cash out in terms of the benefit to other people. If you're suffering less, presumably that's going to manifest in behaviors that less make you less awful to other people. You know what I mean? Like, if you could just be less of if one could just be less of a dick, 10% of the time, that's probably going to make the world a better place. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
but I think that's true of both practices, by the way.
Do you mean the social anxiety benefit is?
Sorry,
true
no.
both?
I mean, mindfulness and metta. Even just paying attention to someone. People feel cared for when you give them your full attention.
I see what you mean. Yeah. Metta so far has definitely been the one that I've shied away from the most, specifically because I was turned off by that supernatural element, but I can see the benefit for it in that way. Yeah. I'm happy you brought that up because I feel like it would be good to get into the more, and when I talk about benefits, I want to make it clear this is something I'm relatively new to and I am skeptical of, but I would like to talk about the the possible benefits in a practical sense of meditating. So social anxiety is a great one. That's something that I suppose hoping to find a benefit in from starting. So, for example, in certain social situations, I might have reoccurring thoughts saying something that's particularly not interesting, or no one's noticing me. And I suppose the way it's been explained to me so far is that by practicing formal meditation practice, that's going to help in that sort of social setting where you'll be able to pull yourself out, recognize essentially this is just a thought, it's this specific reoccurring pattern of thought, notice it, and then put it away and come back to the actual setting. Would you say that seems reasonably accurate?
Have you found that's been of any help sort of in a practical setting?
Well, it's really tough. I notice that I can definitely try to do it in practical settings. But I'm hesitant to say that I've really noticed a benefit. I feel like maybe after an event, like some argument or just some heated moment, I think it's possible that it like can help to calm me down, not get all worked up, sort of put an end to ruminating.
Yep.
But it's not as if I'm just like, you know, like the virgin that starts meditating and just like becomes a Chad in every social setting, or you know, I do find myself in particular social settings having challenges, and then I try to be mindful. But I mean, relieving just like that anxiety in the moment is certainly a benefit, because if you're anxious and ruminating, you're not going to be able to, you know, get out there and talk to people, and it's going to minimize the opportunities of anything positive happening. But I'm still unconvinced of the real practical benefit in that sense.
Yeah, I think it's important not to sort of overstate what it can and can't do, and you do have to kind of respect the practice in the sense of, you know, even I still practice, honestly, probably like 10 minutes a day. It's actually, you know, I'm glad to have that level of routine, but it's actually not very much. You know, you wouldn't think that you would be, a great musician, for example, just practicing 10 minutes a day. So, and that's not to say like, you know, people need to practice like an hour or 2 hours a day. Like, you know, particular individuals might want to do that. I like probably don't, to be frank. But
Yuval Noah Harari, doesn't he meditate like 2 hours a day?
I think so, yeah.
Some crazy shit.
But yeah, you know, it's a fairly, you know, especially in the early stages, I don't really consider myself very experienced, honestly. Yeah, I just think there's limits to what it can do. Like you say, if you're finding like some utility from it, especially after just 3 months, like that's probably a good sign. But it's not going to, you know, the point is it's not to stop these sensations from arising, right? So you're still going to feel, you know, we're all still going to feel social anxiety, or, you know, whatever kinds of feelings, anger, you know, hate, feelings of jealousy, that kind of thing. There's no ability to remove those feelings. It's more a question of how we react to them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And one aspect of meditation practice seems to be, well, I suppose exactly that, feeling a certain feeling, but not, I suppose, associating with it. So you might feel social anxiety, but recognizing it as an appearance in consciousness, see it as something separate to the self rather than being the self or part of the self.
Another way I like to sort of think about it would be something like don't sort of, it's almost as though you're reigniting something like a fire or something. You know, the you feel this sensation that kind of begins, you know, and there's kind of a whole chain of things that tend to happen when you feel that sensation of anxiety or whatever. It kind of has its own, you know, path that's been kind of cleared through the forest that you kind of, you know, tend to travel. And so the question is like, yeah, how am I going to react to this? Am I going to feed this feeling and, you know, sort of multiply it, you know, provide more kind of thoughts in that general direction? Or am I going to say, you know, like you say, some kind of, you know, level of, so to speak, like dissociation? Okay. And then there's no reason to kind of, because, you know, it's important to note, like the actual sensations tend to be very transient. You know, if you feel anxiety or something, like if you really pay attention and you were able to extract yourself from that situation, you would notice it dies away very quickly. The problem is it gets kind of ignited because, oh yeah, this person's looking at me a certain way, or this thought comes into my head, or I notice someone's body language. There's constant points of reignition. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, noticing any sensation. This is a point I want to come back to later. But it's like any sensation, when you really try to focus on it, I've noticed in meditation, it seems to be elusive. You can't really grasp it. It's almost as if all that's there is the sensation that there is a sensation. But when you try to see that sensation, it escapes you. What I'm, I suppose, a little confused with is, so you're in a situation which is causing social anxiety. Recognize that. And then everything to get you out of that seems very separate to meditation, right? Because then you're like, you know, you're thinking, okay, I'll, you know, put this to rest. Who can I talk to? Like, I can talk to this person. it's like you immediately come out of this state of, recognizing that your thoughts and all of this are just separate entities. And so it's like, what is the goal? I mean, in Waking Up, the app, Sam Harris constantly mentions that the goal is, well, a goal is for there to be essentially no barrier between formal meditation practice and real life. And when we consider like, viewing everything as just a screen coming towards you versus like trying to like have a conversation with someone.
Right.
Like that seems almost impossible.
That's interesting. I don't have an exact answer to that, but it's interesting that, I have heard Sam mention this. I assume there was an element of psychedelics in this, but yeah, certainly meditation practice as, I don't know, just a way of practicing that was not conducive to kind of social situations and kind of made a kind of heightened awareness that was actually counterproductive and, maybe inflating certain, negative emotions or something like that, or just kind of making a certain disconnection. I don't know. It's very difficult, and I don't have much sort of textual basis for this, so I apologize for the kind of wild speculation. But there's I feel like there's sort of various notions of like what meditation is supposed to do and kind of what the ideal kind of state is, because you can simultaneously kind of imagine like a sense in which it's kind of almost heightening that sense of mind-body dualism, almost like a radical Cartesian kind of skepticism thing of like, all I can prove that exists is that which is in my direct experience, and I'm just going to totally detach myself from the world, because emotions do have some kind of social reality, right? Like sometimes if you're embarrassed, it's because you did something embarrassing. You can't just fucking kind of dissociate yourself from that in all situations, and sometimes you actually have to learn from the experience of the emotion itself, and that kind of gets into questions of spiritual bypassing, which we can get into, but so that's kind of one vision. And then the alternate vision, which I think is maybe the more correct vision, but certainly people can fall into the impression of either, would be something like, it's more to do with breaking down that distinction between the subject and the object, or the world. It's kind of recognizing that there isn't any, in some sense, there isn't much of a meaningful distinction. I know that's a bit of an abstract idea, but certainly something people have experienced on psychedelics, for example, the sense of ego death, the sense of being one with the world, or sensing a sense of interconnectedness, that kind of thing, as opposed to that more sort of solipsistic version.
Yeah, I guess I would sum up social situations by saying I certainly feel like practicing meditation has had benefits in being able to calm me down in certain situations. One, this is maybe a little embarrassing to say, but I was in one social situation in which I really felt like I couldn't connect with anybody one time. And I remember sitting down and just feeling like, this is okay, I can just sit here for the rest of the night, and if no one talks to me, that's okay. It's interesting just like being here and observing, no matter what anyone else thinks or whatnot. And so the next place I want to go is just to share a story, because I tripped recently for the first time in over a year and several months. I'm not quite sure how long. And I really had this strong sensation that meditation practice kept me grounded. This sounds kind of strange, and once again, I just want to reinforce that I'm skeptical enough in myself to not be recommending to strangers on the internet that anyone should go out and try substances, particularly ones that are most likely illegal where you live. But I did it. And at certain points, I felt like, I guess I'd describe it like my brain was maybe like, a t-shirt or a fabric, and it was kind of like unwinding, and it was eventually going to just become this loose thread. And then, I tried basically like meditating in that setting, and then I had the sensation of everything like coming back together. I particularly noticed, I guess this would be summed up as a kind of paranoia, but maybe, it's an anxiety. I tend to worry that something is going to go wrong, which has like led to bad trips in the past when nothing has gone wrong, but the mere worry that something will go wrong like makes something go wrong, at least internally. And so I noticed I was able to avoid that. And I felt like that was a benefit
Wow.
from meditation. And so I could imagine something happening on a smaller scale in day-to-day life. I feel like part of what psychedelics do is they sort of enhance the very raw aspects of life. You know, maybe that also comes in with like your vision gets better. You seem to be observing like certain processes in your brain. Like you just feel like I'm able to observe what life is from kind of a third person. You know, this self-replicating organism. That's more of a topic for psychedelic use than meditation. But I felt like in that setting, meditation was particularly useful, or the benefit of it was.
I don't know what you think of this. I don't want to sort of take things too off the rails. Certainly there's this sense in which I think we can tie this back to meditation, absolutely. And in fact, I have noticed when doing, or I've heard this reported by other people, I feel like, you know, maybe I've sort of convinced myself of it, but I feel like I've experienced this effect maybe after doing sort of longer practice sessions. But, you know, you can get a certain heightened like visual, it's not that your like vision is improved, but there's sort of like a greater aesthetic quality to nature or something like that. But
from meditation?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it could be imagined. Certainly, I do feel sometimes, quite out of the blue, just a very heightened sense of well-being, and just like, you know, things will kind of be okay. Even as I notice that, you know, that it's kind of, these things are kind of both are true. Like I say, so what I'm referring to is kind of the temporality of kind of existence, right? I'm kind of, what I'll kind of feel is that I notice that everything is kind of temporary, and then I'm around people who are, you know, around my parents or around my dog or something like that, and I recognize that, you know, they have limited time on this earth, but I simultaneously feel like everything's like couldn't be any more okay. You know, perhaps just for seconds at a time. But sorry, this has very, very little relation to what I was going to bring up. I'm curious if this is a distinctly male phenomena. I think it has some, you know, relates to me specifically on some level, and also psychedelics obviously do tend to heighten all facets of experience. But I don't know, I tend to notice like it makes me recognize a certain emotional blunting or something that's characteristic of my own life or something. It's just like you'll notice certain feelings of like, you know, particularly negative emotions, which I'm sure we all do to some extent. You kind of push them away, right? You don't necessarily, or most people don't necessarily process and deal with them, you know, immediately. If it's a lot, right? If it's you know, a death in the family or something like that, you kind of tend to, or at least I tend to not think about it. And there's obviously a certain stereotypically male characteristic of suppressing emotion. So I feel like that's often what kind of comes up for me.
Do you mean you're able to like feel and like process these negative emotions?
Yeah.
Yeah. That leads me to bring up, I feel like that's potentially like a very real benefit of meditation. But I can't help but wonder, I mean, and you know, there's a possibility that they could both be helpful in conjunction, but you know, people put forward like these benefits of meditation, such as that. And then I consider like, you know, if we like lost connections, for example, human society seems to be really disconnected from one another. And I feel like that's a benefit that could come from just, you know, reorganizing the way we live.
Yes, yeah.
But instead, it's like, oh, you know, get it from meditation. We don't have to change anything.
It's fairly stupid in a way if you think about it, right? Like, I mean, as much as I have so much respect for the tradition of meditation and Buddhism and so on, but I'm just saying, like, in terms of the way we think about it, think about Facebook or something. You literally have thousands of people who are, you know, incredibly advanced in their field of psychology, you know, programming, whatever, behavioral economics, who are, you know, creating the platform in such a way so as to capture your attention. That is literally, it's the attention economy. You know, that's literally what they're kind of, you know, trying to engage with and you know, extract from you in a sense. So to you as the individual to you know, to meditate, like do you not see the kind of power imbalance there?
Yeah,
it's like
yeah, you can have this practice which is gonna
like go and do like 10,000
focus.
hours. You know what I mean? Even so, these are people who are literally, you know what I mean, experts in their field. They're literally paid, you know, like millions and millions of dollars.
It's unlikely you're going to be able to beat them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
No, I think that's it. I mean, I think there's a lot of really broad questions to sort of get into, like what is a potential I think we should be kind of humble about this, but any potential political projects that Buddhism might kind of align itself with. But certainly, oh man, there's a lot. The questions of like human nature in terms of, you referenced earlier, kind of recognizing people as, to whatever degree, products of their own environment. I'm not sure to the extent to which that is kind of inherent to a Buddhist, so to speak. I know we're kind of getting into Buddhism, and that's obviously very separable from the questions of meditation and mindfulness, but, separable from a Buddhist kind of worldview. I apologize, that was a lot. So
No.
Is there anything you wanted to sort of jump on there?
It's a really good topic. I think the only place I have to go is kind of a segue, which is when we previously talked about sensations being kind of elusive, or you try and like notice this feeling of, let's say it's anxiety, and then it kind of disappears when you look for it. I feel like lately I've been wrestling with moral nihilism, and then justifying any kind of normative ethics. So I suppose I should give a bit of background to that. If we think of, I'll just take utilitarianism, like why is pleasure and pain good? The way I've been viewing this lately is just looking back, the dawn of life, some sort of self-perpetuating DNA through the virtue of natural selection, not for any goal, but just the only ones that could continue to exist are the ones that would have this drive to continue to exist, which is something that evolved by chance, not because it somehow just objectively better to feel pleasure or pain, but those are simply mechanisms that have been ingrained into us through the process of natural selection. And I'm finding it hard to justify that as being actually good or bad. I always felt like, we could have this kind of, maybe not objective, but like collective morality where, people can agree on what is right and wrong.
Yep.
But still, it doesn't escape that it's hard to justify. Any sensation of pain, it's just a cue in my brain that signals X and Y. And, even like really bad, like torture from some sort of more objective standpoint, I can't say that that's actually wrong. It's only wrong. Like, it can be wrong, but it can only be wrong in some sort of system of normative ethics. And what system we choose is based off nothing. Like, I don't think it's bad to have a normative ethics, but, by virtue of being human, you can't help to value and not value certain things. But outside of our minds and our normative ethics, I don't think there is really value. And I feel like meditation plays into this, because if I notice like a physical sensation of pain, and like it's hard to demonstrate without like doing something that would cause permanent damage, which I don't want to do. So maybe if like someone was sawing my leg off, I would immediately back out of this.
Yep.
But like if I just like pinch myself or something and I really focus on that sensation, it doesn't feel negative. It just feels like it's there.
Yeah, just briefly, I don't know that I would advocate it, but I think a safe way of, if people wanted to, for whatever sick reasons, do like some kind of pain practice, Shinzen Young talks about in his book, The Science of Enlightenment, being in a kind of a monastery type environment, like he was not necessarily of his own accord, but through some kind of, institution, was in a position where, I think he was like not eating, and like he was in a very cold room with no heating. So something like that is, I think, unlikely to, a really dumb one that I sometimes, it's not doing intentionally, but I'm able to like get the benefit. It's so stupid, but like carrying like a hot bowl out of the microwave or something, it's like, I feel like I can endure a few more seconds or something than it's weird. There's a way in which you wonder how far it can go, how if you could get sufficiently skilled, this ability to kind of, disavow or detach yourself from pain.
Well, one example I'd like to give is, like, my initial desire for this came out of competitiveness, because I remember you told me you got a blood test and you like looked at the needle going into your arm.
See, subsequently, I've had blood tests subsequently, and I'm like, nah, I'm not doing that again. So
I was like,
it's a very temporary sort of state of
Adrian did
shadness.
that. I've got to like, I've got to do it.
Yeah.
To live up. And like the first few times I tried, I couldn't do it. But then I started meditating, and it's like this was 2 instances. One when I got a blood test, another when I got the COVID vaccine. Well, I guess more than 2 instances since I got the vaccine twice.
Yeah.
And I like saw my arm, and I'm thinking like in my head, I'm like trying not to think thoughts, but I just recognize this as all like one appearance in consciousness, and then I like see the needle go in and everything, and you know I just observe it, and it did, you know, it's just like it didn't feel bad, it didn't feel terrifying or scary or something.
See, that's really interesting to me, just in the sense that on a sort of personal level, like, yeah, I'm personally like very squeamish, and I think that would honestly be one of the most useful feelings, I guess, to kind of, you know, obviously you can't inhibit it, you can't block it, but to kind of be able to deal with that more effectively. You know, I recently did a first aid course, and I was just thinking like, you know, even if I had the sort of ability to do, you know, what's it called? Fucking, you know, when CPR. You do the CPR or bandage someone up.
Sounds like you didn't pay attention.
Yeah, exactly.
First aid course.
I feel as though I would just kind of be overcome by like the actual, you know, viscerality of that experience or something. Like our teacher was actually like a doctor back in India, and she was talking about like, you know, doing autopsies on corpses and that kind of thing, and just kind of being very lax and you know, kind of chill about like sort of playing with the bodies and everything. And it's like, oh my god, like that's, you kind of need that, right? As a doctor, you probably just want to be like totally desensitized to like you know, or to some extent also, I guess, suffering, like as in, you know, while you're dealing with the patient or whatever, you need to like dissociate with that if you're in a war zone or something. Like,
yeah, when you're sawing someone's leg off, and all they go for pain relief,
it's just like, no, you know, I'm just here to saw the thing off. Like, don't even, you know, imagine it's like a tree or something like that.
Yeah,
you know, like
I could,
it's not helpful.
I could definitely imagine mindfulness being a benefit for, I guess you could put squeamishness under the umbrella of like phobias. Anything you're afraid to do, I could really imagine, like, you know, just almost like, you know, if you're afraid to go somewhere, just kind of like watch yourself go there.
I wanted to sort of flip it, the topic to, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but in terms of the implications also for, we're talking about the implications for pain and unpleasant sensations, but what about in terms of pleasure and pleasant sensations?
Yeah.
Because, you know, there's a kind of troubling quality to realizing like they are obviously they're like equally transient as, you know, it's like you get the nice feeling of like, oh, you know, embarrassment is very transient. Oh, fuck, that also means joy is very transient.
Yeah, so I feel like, this is very much part of that topic that I wanted to come to. I sort of wonder, like, you know, if you use meditation to let's say like let go of all these negative things, then are you not disattaching yourself from, you know, all the positive things, positive utility? And then I suppose you could say like, oh, well, you know, you can use this meditation, you know, it's like a thing you consciously do, right? So you can use this meditative practice to let go of negativity, whereas still like, you know, very much feel the, you know, the positivity. I don't know how convincing that is. Like, you know, if you take the Sam Harris approach, then, you know, you're supposed to be like essentially meditating all the time, or otherwise it's like, it's predicated on like feeling, you know, positive emotions being a good thing, which I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I certainly like to feel, I like to feel good things, you know, that's why we consider them good.
To sort of take that in a different direction though, like in terms of the effects of, you know, having a meditative practice and being able to recognize the transient nature of, say, you know, a positive emotion, and that can be perhaps a little bit confronting. The question is that any worse than not recognizing the true nature of, because presumably it's transient in either circumstance, whether you learn to meditate or don't, but in one case you just don't recognize, you know, the nature of, you know, reality, so to speak. So what I'm saying is, even though you might feel that, oh, I can perhaps get less of a certain, less experience out of a pleasant sensation or something like that. For example, like, well, I don't know. You could equally argue with Haydn's it. I believe you mentioned a friend who mentioned getting more out of music based on his meditation practice. So I'm not sure what I think about that. I think for me, maybe this will help bring some clarity to the situation. I think the problem is it's all tied up with my own values, and I don't think anyone needs to like follow this. In fact, maybe you like shouldn't, because whatever. I feel like for me it's reoriented myself towards, I can kind of enjoy sort of simpler pleasures more or something. Like I feel more inclined to, I don't know, read a somewhat dry book or something that's kind of just like /mildly interesting, or even if it is very interesting, something that like, do you know what I mean? Like there are obviously benefits to detaching your kind of dependency on pleasure if it comes to unhealthy food or pornography or procrastination or that kind of thing. So and then the ultimate question is just then, well, what about the pleasures that are obviously like very intrinsically meaningful, like a romantic relationship, or hanging out with your friends and family, that kind of thing?
Well, I think I would relate to that, maybe like feeling of getting more pleasure from meditating. Like I've definitely had moments where it sounds kind of corny, but like noticing the beauty of certain like flowers or stuff as you walk somewhere. I've had like, I remember speaking to one guy at an event, and he was talking about how he's gotten really into meditating, and I think maybe he the way he talked about it was probably a bit exaggerated, but he was it was like everything is in like ultra HD, and he's like recognizing everything, and it's certainly interesting. So I don't know, it's hard to imagine meditating really meaning that you get less pleasure out of like listening to your favorite song, for example. But if you if you try and apply a practice like recognizing that feeling of pleasure, then it seems to escape you once again, and everything seems to come to this neutrality. And then if we talk about one idea of pleasure and pain that we've discussed on the show before is pleasure often being the relief of pain, everything sort of evening out in the end. The pleasure of urinating is balanced out by that sensation of needing to go to the bathroom, or eating.
But I think perhaps just because we've kind of promulgated that, kind of unexamined, I mean, I don't think that's true. For example, sometimes, certainly, if you're feeling a certain emotional state or something, and then you turn to music as a therapeutic kind of tool. But I don't know that that's true of like consuming art or like a nice cake or some shit.
Yeah, I it's definitely something I grapple with, because I don't think the sensation of eating a nice meal is like just that you're not hungry anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too distracted here. And,
sure.
I suppose you could say it like, and I'm not particularly like married to the idea of everything being neutral, but there probably are negatives that you don't recognize, like if you eat a really tasty meal that's like got sugar in it, then your energy might crash a couple hours later or something. But I'm happy to accept that there are like intrinsic goods, like if I just came up to you and like massaged you, like it's hard to imagine there being like anything like bad that comes along with that.
Yeah, I wasn't saying there was a caveat to the pleasure in the sense of like, oh, I'm having short-term pleasure now for some long-term loss, like eating, a nice, a cake or something that's quite unhealthy. I was just referring to the idea of like pleasure intrinsically as being some kind of relief from pain in the example of urination or something.
And I wouldn't say it's necessarily that.
But, it could be, I mean, we don't want to get too deep, and I haven't thought about this too much, but it could be that it's kind of the satisfying of that desire, you know what I mean? Like fundamentally, say the example of music or something, presumably, even if it's just an instant before, I have to express some desire to listen to that music before I kind of engage with it. And so then the desire is some kind of deprivation. It's a recognition of that what I have now is not what I, want to have. I want to have, this experience right now. And so then that sense of lack is then fulfilled by engaging in that activity. You know what I mean? So maybe you're actually right.
Yeah, well, I feel like this is where we can sort of go into discussing Buddhism. Not that I'm particularly an expert on Buddhism, of course. I just mean in the sense of like, recognizing suffering as this issue, and which of course you may or may not subscribe to, but then seeing desire as the root of all suffering.
Right.
So if you think of this typical like this monk life of just living on some monastery, and it doesn't seem like they're particularly like interesting lives, but
yeah.
Essentially, instead of what I understand is instead of going through I think a lot of our lives are this very up and down thing, they just try and like keep it neutral. You can minimize all this desire and suffering through the practice of meditation. Your desire to get up and go do something interesting, you can just recognize that and disassociate from it. But then you get into
to be clear, like that doesn't strike me as a remotely desirable life, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But why fulfill that desire? But I feel like you run into two problems. One is like, is that even possible? Like, how long can you just sit down, meditate for? Like, you'll get bored. Okay, so you recognize this sensation of boredom. You just keep going. Like, it seems like at some point someone's going to stop, right? It's like meditation. Like, I can get down and do the plank or do some push-ups, right? And no matter how much like my willpower keeps me there,
right,
I feel like I'm going to drop. I believe it could be similar with meditation, although obviously it's not like a physical muscle. But and the second place is like, if that's really true, right? If you get great at meditating and can just recognize everything, and you achieve this state of like true neutrality, I sort of wonder like, what's like the benefit of even being alive in that sense,
right?
If you can escape all suffering as being just like this truly neutral being, why even live?
Right. And especially in the context of the monastery, I don't know too much about their sort of lives, but you would think maybe at least in that context, I mean, there's kind of the bodhisattva path, so the idea is like I guess it has some kind of for lack of a better word, theological elements to it, in the sense that the idea is that if there's a sense of people are ascending to nirvana or something, escaping that cycle of reincarnation, the idea is that some people will voluntarily, who are experienced practitioners, will voluntarily kind of stay on earth in order to help the rest of humanity kind of pass over, so to speak. But so when you take up the bodhisattva vow, it's kind of this idea of voluntarily not ascending in order to bring good to others. So let me just be clear, like the practical non-theological version of this would just be like devoting your life to reducing the suffering of others. So imagine like if Mother Teresa was like not actually a terrible person and was Buddhist. That's kind of is the cliched image I have in my mind. But in the case of the Buddhist, the monk in the monastery, it's like, I mean, it's nice that you've reduced your own suffering, but honestly, like, wouldn't it be better to like make yourself suffer a little bit by like going out in the world and like trying to help people or something?
Well,
like,
noticing like monks in practice, and I'm hesitant to like generalize, but there are like Buddhist foundations and that do things like feeding the homeless.
Right.
And, that seems almost like in contradiction, right? Like, presumably they have some desire to reduce the suffering in the world. This desire is the root of all suffering. So why would they fulfill that desire of feeding the homeless people? You know, like that certainly gives them some pleasure. And there was also with our university's Buddhist society, I went to a talk, a Dharma talk by one guy who was not a monk. Kind of interesting. He was just kind of this dude, like, rocks up in a jacket and then just chatted about Buddhism. It was, it was good. But he says, a lot of people want to be monks. And, I tried to ask him basically this question about, like, like pleasure and pain and that. Why not just, like, live on a monastery and live this life of neutrality? And his answer was basically just that it's not realistic. Like, you just can't meditate all day. You just get bored.
Right.
You live life on a monastery. You wake up, you eat this boring meal of like oats every day.
Yeah, it's got to be bland, real bland food.
I mean, that's kind of my breakfast anyway. But
sure.
And then I guess you like sweep and tidy, and then do your meditation, and like that's it. And he says like people just can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, like, maybe meditation can reduce your suffering to a certain extent, and so maybe the answer is just that, it can sort of like flatten some of these peaks and valleys, but it can't really like bring you to this true neutral state. And then that still doesn't address the question of whether flattening these peaks and valleys is even a good thing to do.
Yeah, for one thing, people certainly do a whole lot of good without having any explicit spiritual kind of orientation. Do you know what I mean? Like a nurse or a doctor or those kinds of people. They do just an absurd amount of good if you total the amount of lives they've saved or even suffering they've ameliorated. Even if someone's on their deathbed, just having that emotional comfort or whatever. There was no need for them to. Presumably, that is incredibly emotional, challenging, and they find ways of sort of approaching that. But clearly that is the question for me, although certainly there's this whole sense of it being a subjective kind of first person experiment that you run on yourself, and if you see benefits then you can continue, if you don't then you can stop, and that that to me has been a compelling enough experiment for me to continue. It's like, is there anything about individuals who are at the top of their game, so to speak, in this field that makes me think like, oh, I like need to acquire this level of skill or equanimity or something? And actually I feel the same way about psychedelics. It's like, is there something just obvious about someone who's done a lot of psychedelic trips and claims to have reached some kind of epiphany from that, something in the way they hold themselves or the way they've conducted their lives that makes me go like, oh, like I need this experience or this practice to kind of get there? And so far, like, I don't know that I'm convinced, like, to be completely honest.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like part of this comes from like people who just exaggerate the benefits, like, for example, that guy that I mentioned before who basically made it sound like meditating for, I don't know what, he's probably doing it for 10 minutes a day is like taking the limitless pill. It's hard to say. I would say that I try and be skeptical. From my perspective, I've noticed benefits. It's almost like my skepticism, it's like I feel a certain benefit, and then the skepticism comes in and it's like, oh, are those benefits even real or imagined? And I suppose you can get into talks about like placebo, like meditation just being a placebo. For something like this, it's it's hard to say, because even if it is a placebo, it's not as if there's no value in it, right? It's
interesting to me though that like I feel, and yes, absolutely. I feel this a similar kind of thing actually with exercise, or at least have historically, where throughout my life, that is to say, where okay, so let's say I'm running consistently for a few weeks or something. Suddenly the obviousness of the effects. Okay, there's two things. I mean, I don't tend to get very far, so let's make that clear. But there's a certain relative plateauing of progress. For someone who's like just started, gone from not running to running. Do you know what I mean? And there's also a sort of it's like fish in water or something like that. You lose the ability to differentiate your circumstances, like the effects of what you're doing. So like say running or something, it has certain psychological benefits in terms of, feeling good or enhancing your attention or X, Y, and Z. It starts to just become the air you breathe, and you don't notice. It's kind of like that's neutral. That's what the baseline is. And it's only when you stop running or you stop meditating that suddenly you realize like, oh, I was actually getting all these benefits that I had become complacent about and, didn't realize I was continuing to receive, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I wonder,
So even with something that looks a bit more on paper like scientifically proven, although I think meditation is as well, pretty compellingly, that psychological kind of, system seems to, constantly arise.
So I feel like maybe, so I'm not a runner. So my version is, here in Australia, gyms have just opened back up. And so I was able to go and like, holy shit, dude. Like after like, the first couple sessions, after like every session at the beginning, I was feeling like solid, like 9 or even 10 out of 10. Like,
Right.
I was just feeling like so good. And now I think I still feel like, like a bit better from running. Not from running, from going to the gym. But it's like brushing my teeth, you know?
Yes.
It's kind of just like
diminishing returns, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if it's like, the benefit like becomes less, or if it's just you don't notice it.
Yeah, I think the latter.
Yeah, but it's hard to say that like this is like somehow like doing like this humongously great thing for me, and then I'm just noticing it. I feel like the benefit decreases maybe a little bit, and then you just forget about it. That's potentially a better way to put it. And so the point you're making is that it can be a similar thing for meditating, like.
Just to clarify that it wasn't restricted to the realm of meditation, which some people express some skepticism about, whereas, people are pretty fucking unanimous on like the benefits of running, for example.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I can definitely imagine that. I feel like we've put forward 2 ideas regarding like pleasure and pain that maybe somewhat clash with each other. One being that, when I talked about like moral nihilism, pleasure and pain not really mattering at all, and through the practice of meditation, recognizing that. And the other being pain is really bad, and through meditation, we can reduce it. So those 2 ideas seem to go against one another. It's hard to say, like in practice, by virtue of being human, encountering suffering definitely feels like a negative thing. But then I sort of feel like if meditation can reduce that, that seems good. But simultaneously, through meditative practice, I feel like I recognize it as not even a bad thing. And that's connected to also recognizing pleasure is not necessarily a good thing.
Right.
Like it seems as if, none of this really matters, man. And it's just, I can go through life in like agony, and why should I try and stop it?
Yeah, to pick up on that point, I was cautious about bringing this up because I don't want it to sound like kind of a lazy analysis, and to the extent that it is, I do apologize, but I do wonder if there is a cultural kind of gap here, in the sense of, people have expressed that this sense of like the no self view has an intrinsic, like, people from the West, that is, like, feel as though it kind of has a nihilistic bent to it. And some of the stuff that, obviously, like, Nietzsche, when talking about, God is dead, or at least the sort of, basis for our moral values, kind of some, objective cosmological basis, was kind of very much viewing that in kind of a negative context. Western philosophers have sought to kind of reify the self in a lot of ways. I mean, they've also sought to deconstruct it, I guess. But, let's take this idea of like, nihilism or something. I'm not totally sure if you went back to, like back in the day to, I don't know, the time of Buddha or some shit, and, kind of promulgated a kind of philosophical nihilism or something, that would be entirely unappealing. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can have this idea and then you put it into different cultural contexts, and there's kind of a different visceral reaction to that of like, oh, that's really bad, or oh, that's like how things are to begin with. You know what I mean? That is the nature of existence, and finding actually some kind of solace in that. I don't know that it's intrinsically either way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I sort of see that. I think it's probably connected to people putting forward meditation as like this self-help tool.
Yep.
To like just make yourself immune to all pain and have this like amazing life.
It just reminds me of like, there's a certain association I have of people who are like kind of like biohackers or whatever, like Jack Dorsey types who, do one meal a day, and they're kind of like optimizing their body kind of thing. And it's very natural with that sort of ideology, so to speak, to want to, view it as a purely kind of, just erase the kind of negatives, for example, and also I think take it, into a context that's more kind of accessible or something. So the point I would make there is something like the level of commitment. People, once again, this East-West distinction is a little bit bullshit now, because I'm more talking in a historical sense, because now, we have a very integrated, world capitalist system, which, or at least, a globalized world is the most important point, whatever the underlying forces for that, people happen to think with the cause. But the point is, I don't think it's like this idea of like the West is individualistic and the East is collectivist. Like that's pretty orientalist at this point. Like, you know what I mean? And maybe it was never true to some full extent. But in terms of level of commitment, it's much more transitory. You can do the 10 minutes a day. You can do the weekend meditation retreat, as opposed to it's, among places where the tradition is still a lot, deeper and has a deeper history. It is more like a lifelong spiritual path that you'd, devote your entire life to. And, it's just completely different in that sense. But another thing I wanted to bring up briefly was something like the dark night of the soul. So this is common to a lot of religious traditions, also like Christian, I think, mysticism, but it just refers to a period. Oh, that's interesting. Well, so allegedly, I'm not sure if it's exactly nihilism, so we'd have to honestly like look into that. But basically, it's a period in which there is certainly a lot of doubt about the path one is on, whether it's Christianity or whether it's Buddhism, and profound feelings of perhaps a recognition of kind of suffering, a rumination and obsession over death. It's kind of seen as a kind of wall people often hit in their spiritual journey, and kind of something to be overcome, not something that people get stuck in kind of eternally. But something like that is like, that's a possible place where, meditation really can go wrong, and people can do meditation in all sorts of harmful ways. And
so you mean like, you meditate, you feel like, okay, nothing matters, and you consider that like a negative thing? Or
well, I guess I don't want to get too deep into that. Let's say, for in this example, it's like rumination on death or something like that. So something that's like viscerally kind of unpleasant.
Okay.
Because the nihilism, I don't want to impute, or like, once again, that cultural or linguistic distinction. I don't want to impute nihilism onto that experience that I don't know enough about. But another example would even be, according to Sam, and I haven't read this elsewhere, but he does talk about even like if you are mentally unstable, like maybe you just shouldn't do really long periods of meditation. Like maybe that's just not okay for people to do, if so. It's like these are the kind of things that are very interesting in their own way, but tend to get kind of pushed out of the conversation when we're talking about mindfulness as kind of this remedy for all our ills. If you're feeling bad, I mean, gets into the political questions, but if you're feeling kind of overworked and stressed out at your Amazon warehouse or whatever, just pop into the meditation cubicle and you're all sorted, right?
Yeah. So why is that not the case? Like, why should Amazon workers not just be slaves and, like they can meditate to reduce the suffering? Is it just that's unrealism? Or, it seems to be unfair that like there can be some huge boss at the top that doesn't have to do all that? Like if we can see meditation as this way to reduce suffering, I wouldn't say that it does this, but it runs the risk of like actually improving the quality of life, becoming like, secondary or less important.
Yes. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think this is where I was kind of talking about that solipsistic versus that kind of, becoming, for lack of a better word, becoming one with the world or something, or, feeling more interrelated with other living beings kind of versions. You know, I think of something like Stoicism, which I also think has kind of useful tenets or practices like negative visualization. So you imagine, it sounds morbid, but you imagine like terrible things that could happen to you and sort of reflect, you know, it's
what's the worst thing that could happen if I do this? And just accept that.
And well, it may not even be a specific action. It could be totally imagined. So we could be, you know, if we lived in like Syria right now or something, you know, we could be hit by a you know, drone or whatever, drone strike. So it's, well, yeah. So it's kind of, it's like a catharsis kind of thing when you go and, you know, the idea behind Greek theater tragedy, you know, you go and watch a, like, you know, for lack of a better word, very tragic kind of situation in which someone, you know, has all their children die and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And at the end, it's like, there's a kind of sense of like, wow, thank fuck, that's like not me, you know what I mean? And that's a very real and powerful and meaningful kind of feeling. But yeah, Stoicism, it's kind of like, you know what I mean? It's like, don't change that which you know, have no control over, only that within your locus of control. But the problem is like, where do you set that? There's nothing totally objective about that. Yeah, I can't immediately like, you know, anything that requires collective action, like collective bargaining or, you know, union organizing or something, there's a way in which you could conceptualize it as both within and beyond the locus of control, if that makes sense. I can't change it fucking tomorrow, you know what I mean? But in the long run, coordinating with other beings, you know, it could be achieved. So it's kind of like, yeah, not to lapse into that solipsism, I think. And I think it's important to keep, well, I don't know, you know, I don't want to speak for these traditions. I think to an extent, you know, mindfulness and Buddhism are politically neutral, and it's kind of nice to have that, something that's, you know, you do kind of want on one level your spirituality to be distinct from all of that and be able to kind of see beyond it, but certainly as an you know, as an embodied historical, you know, out of the terms of the abstract, it certainly has aligned itself with political movements, whether it's, you know, the unfortunate genocide in Myanmar at the hands of the, you know, is it the Rohingya Muslims at the hand of, you know, Buddhist kind of majority state. But also, I mean, I really wanted to mention this. I've got a lot of sort of Marxist related books over here. Viewers at home were probably thinking we're going to talk about these. They're just for decoration. We don't know how to read. But here's the reintegration. So the current Dalai Lama in an interview expressed interest in creating a synthesis between Buddhism and Marxism. Yes, that was very fascinating to read. I think that's from like the 90s. I don't know. He said that he considers himself half Buddhist, half Marxist. Yeah, which is, very surprising, honestly. So you can, and there's people, I believe, unfortunately, I haven't read the literature on this, but there's people who do talk about like a Buddhist economics. Bhutan, I think, is a country that is quite, I don't know if it's Buddhist, but they have a similar, I'm going to say it's Buddhism. It's very similar, and they have been big in advocating a economic metric called gross national happiness, as opposed to, you know, gross national product or whatever. But yeah, I don't think there's. I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on this, and anyone who's already written on this. But I don't know if there's an intrinsic link between, you know, that's kind of what I was getting at before about like the idea of like free will and people as a product of their own environment, because I think that leads you to reject a certain individualism that is quite tied to a political project. You know, let's just say a basic example, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps or whatever, or, you know, you're addicted to drugs, just get off it, you know what I mean? As opposed to having some kind of societal structure in place. It's like, I think your view of human nature there actually does end up aligning to some political position. Do you think that's fair? Potentially, like, do you mean if you think humans are like totally in control of their own destinies, and if you really wanted to get off drugs, like you just could? And I mean, there's so much there. There's like scientific elements, right, of whether you understand the science of addiction. But let's try to take it. I don't think you can just like will yourself to do anything, or you know, I don't think you can choose what you want to do. Yes. Yeah. Like I could imagine meditation, you know, being helpful for someone that's, you know, trying to quit drugs. I'm sure that it is, but, you know, as well as that, there are like massive societal reasons why people stay on drugs. Yeah. Or, you know, they try and quit repeatedly and they can't do it. And, you know, many people are, you know, very eager to say, oh, you know, just do it. It seems to me, I hope this doesn't get too far away from the topic, but it seems to me the idea of like, you know, for a broadly, maybe even liberal, but certainly liberal capitalist kind of view of, you know, human nature or something, you know, utility maximizing individual is a very important one, you know, rational. And it's like, and incentive structures and so on in terms of the profit motive. It's like my feeling is that the kind of societal constraints you set up, they obviously impact the kind of influences and incentives that people encounter. So for example, if you're poor and don't have a reasonable set of economic opportunities, and it's reasonably there might be, I don't know, cultural or just like environmental pressures for you to commit crime or something, then in that case, in a soft sense of like free will, your freedom of choice is kind of constrained, as opposed to someone who doesn't have those kind of pressures. And when people will point to, we have we have two people who are in the same situation and someone else made a different choice, a better choice, they would argue, it's like, okay, but what were the conditions for them making that choice? What kind of influences did they have in terms of parental concerns, or even honestly some genetic proclivity, against addiction, or for, I don't think these are fully ingrained, but I think they can have elements, like whatever, hard work or a certain type of, discipline or control of oneself, So yeah, kind of gets into, I mean, it sounds a bit technocratic, I know, but kind of like social engineering or something, or just like, okay, we have an understanding of like, let's say we have a Buddhist understanding of how, human nature operates, and we can ally that with science. How then do we construct a society? I think we can imagine ways in which you certainly wouldn't. Do you know what I mean? You wouldn't not absolutely have structures in place to help people with addiction. You wouldn't just leave it up to the individual.
I hope this isn't too much of a segue.
I'm already derailing the convo. So
I feel like I managed to inject this into probably every well, yeah, I do manage to inject this into I think almost every podcast we've done, but it does seem genuinely related here. But animal agriculture, that's something that I would consider political and heavily, I mean, not to everyone, but often it seems very intertwined with Buddhism. So, obviously, for like any new viewers, I'm vegan. And, Buddhism has this practice of ahisma, non-violence, which expands itself to any sentient creature. I notice there's plenty of Buddhists, including the Dalai Lama, who are not vegetarians or vegans. Like, this is, certainly a more casual setting, so it's pretty understandable. But, like, even the University Buddhist Society, there is, like, I think one person there that is vegan. And then I noticed when we went to a restaurant after that Dharma talk that I previously mentioned, it seemed like most of the people ordered a vegetarian meal. And then, like, there were a couple people that ordered meat meals, which I seemed particularly strange because it was, like, right after a Buddhist talk. And, it's not as if, like, it's, like, truly equal, but, like, you do have to, like, specifically choose the meat option, as opposed to, like, probably half the menu was vegetarian.
Yeah, I think it's very tricky. I let me state up front, I honestly, like, wish, like, all Buddhists were vegan, and that, like, it was very well not enforced in the sense of, like, it was deemed as very, very important. And maybe it being a specific tenet, it does seem implied by the principle of nonviolence, and it does have a metaphysical basis that's obviously distinct to Christianity or something, where animals are kind of made for the the consumption or the to be used as tools by humans and do not have eternal souls. So you can see Buddhism has a different metaphysical basis on which we might actually justify reducing harm to animals. But yeah, it's difficult. I don't know how strong the sort of textual justification, prohibition against eating animals is. And even so, I don't know. It's another debate about the question of, like, interpretation of religious texts. But think about all the things that, like, personally, I think, like, people of broadly speaking of the Christian faith, like, probably wouldn't be engaging in if they, there's a whole interesting debate about the merits of kind of attaining wealth. Do you know what I mean? In terms of, like, the Protestant ethic and, lending of money and stuff. It's so overquoted. It's still good, though. It's far more likely for a camel to enter the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. But then you also have the one that's like, to he who hath, like, everything shall be given to him, and to he who have nothing, everything shall be taken away. So it's kind of like this weird, I don't know, veneration of, like, wealth and power, of, like, that's only going to get more concentrated. And that's just, I don't know if that's meant to be a good thing or just the way things are, but it's like, do you see what I mean? There's if you take the tradition of Christianity, there's a whole range of things you could prescribe or prohibit, and referencing the same materials. So unfortunately,
I mean, I guess this is basically just a problem with every religion.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
I feel like the practitioners, to a certain extent, can kind of discredit it. Like, you know, I found it really disappointing when I heard that, you know, even the Dalai Lama is not even a vegetarian.
Yeah.
Let alone vegan. I mean, like he went to meet you know, former President Obama, was offered a vegetarian meal and then like declined it for the meat.
Based.
Like, what? Oh.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you know the answer to this. Isn't that a sort of weird thing in Hinduism as well? Like, what's the sort of consensus on meat eating? Because you certainly encounter people who will not eat meat, or at least beef, I think, for religious reasons.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem totally consistent, or maybe some people are more or less religious, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, in Hinduism, for example, I mean, there's plenty of Hindu vegetarians. On half my side is Indian, and on, you know, all their ancestry, probably for hundreds of thousands of years, or not hundreds of thousands of years, sorry, but probably for hundreds or thousands of years, were all vegetarian.
Well,
but you know, it's hard to see what the like real justification for that is. You know, that could be some sort of almost like a chastity, but you know, it's pretty well known that they do consider cows at least to be sacred. So, for, you know, out of respect for the cow, basically, they will not eat meat. But then there's like dairy and like ghee, which is clarified butter made from cow's milk, used in like practically every Indian dish.
Right.
And, you know, like in these days in the 21st century, you know, it's very easy to find out all of the cruelty that goes on in the dairy industry. It's not really like any better to eat cheese than it is to eat beef.
Is it different? I you know, you can honestly like cut this out if you like, but is it different in a sort of rural setting? Like if you have your own cow or something, are you necessarily like culling the? I guess that's not even how it works for cows, right? In terms of the conditions under which they produce milk, they presumably need to give birth to a child. Do you know what I mean? Whereas they tend to be forcibly separated under conditions of, you know, like industrial factory farming. I'm saying, is there a moral difference to kind of the rural setting? Like maybe they wouldn't separate the young, and they would, you know.
Yeah, well, I would definitely say it's like less bad
in terms of milk. I'm saying, because imagine like, yeah, obviously you will.
Yeah, well, we probably need to like briefly like give an overview of like, you know, a couple things wrong with milk. One being that, as you mentioned,
artificial insemination as well.
Yeah, so
right.
All like mammals only produce milk as part of like, you know, the pregnancy cycle when they reproduce. So yeah, as you mentioned, that artificially inseminated, when they do give birth to this child, it's immediately taken away, causing great grievance. There are more factors that go into it, but you know, like probably less of that happens in rural settings, and you know, would consider it less bad. But like in like commercial settings in India, right? Exactly. It's still like the same.
I'm not trying to claim like people in India, like I think they're all eating like you know, a small town farm.
And you know, there's like Hindus in Australia that
exactly.
buy it from like, you know, the biggest factory farmers that are out there.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I could totally imagine like a Hindu saying that, oh, you know, just taking like a bit of the milk from the cow isn't disrespecting it the same way that cutting it up and eating it is. But, you know, in like a more practical sense of how that actually works, I think it's extremely rare or unlikely to ever encounter that.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to circle back to the idea of like, you know, to the extent of the connection between Buddhism and politics, honestly, it's something I would like consider working on like in the future, like, I don't know, some kind of project, you know, that synthesis between Marxism and Buddhism that has been referenced. I'm sure others have started that process, but you know, I think that'd be an interesting kind of project. But yeah, based on my like current, like admittedly very low quantity of information, knowledge, you know, I don't necessarily think there's any intrinsic. I just think well, at least it can go certain ways. We might be able to identify as ways in which you can't. There's the whole, actually, this has probably been mentioned before as well. Zen at war, you know, the support of Zen Buddhists for the you know, Japanese fascist sort of, you know, military and political, you know, expansion. So obviously you can have a fascist Buddhism. So I was about to say like, oh, maybe there's things we can say like you couldn't have, you know, in line with kind of what I was saying about their conception of human nature, but maybe that's wrong. You know, we've also talked about the range of eating habits for Buddhists. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope I've outlined some of my ideals in terms of, yeah, obviously veganism would be nice. Obviously a less punitive, maybe more distributive kind of, you know, political and economic system. I think would tend to align more with Buddhism, but I want to be clear, like that's my opinion. And I don't think that's anything intrinsic to Buddhism.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah. Was there anything more you wanted to add?
I think that's all for now.
Okay. Well, I hope that we've provided a good outline of, you know, at least our personal experiences with meditation and some connected topics. So very much hope you enjoyed. Feel free to like and subscribe and comment any of your thoughts down below. Tell us how wrong we are.
Please do, yeah.
Thanks for tuning in.